Hello, my name is Susan Wilbanks, and I am a member of the Grant Analyst team here in GCA. And I am going to present this training on the workflow sheet internal system that we use to track work between the various streams and teams here at GCA. And this training is designed for newer GCA employees to give you guidance on this system. So just a brief history of the workflow sheet. These were created as a way for the grant analyst team to request assistance from the streams, usually on behalf of a campus partner or sponsor. And this was created all the way back in 2010 when we were first moving into using Lean, and the grant analyst team had just been put in place. And we needed a good way to be consistent and to have documentation when we were routing requests through GCA. And this was designed by the GA team with input from each stream on what information they needed to be able to work with the sheets that we were giving them. And this was prior to COVID, a paper form. And since 2020, this has been all electronic. These forms are used to request an action from one or more streams to resolve an issue. Though they were originally created by the grant analyst team, they're used whenever two teams need to communicate and request work from another team. An example of when a stream might create a form: you might be reaching out to the grant analyst team asking us to follow up with a sponsor. For example, if you're setting up a new budget and you need the tax ID number, or you're closing out a budget and need the correct address to send a refund. It's also a form you can use if you're requesting another stream to take needed action. Say you discover while working on the budget setup something that will need to be done by the reporting team, and you could send a workflow sheet to them to carry out that action. So how do you know which type of workflow sheet to use? We have a couple of different types, and we have priority levels. Urgent is when you have an item that requires immediate attention. The turnaround time on these requests is 1 working day or maybe 2. Semi-urgent is when you have a request that needs to be completed within 3 to 5 business days. And the majority of requests will fall into this category. And current is when you have a request that isn't urgent. The due date can be anywhere from 1 week to 1 month. The one thing to keep in mind when you're receiving a current workflow sheet, just because it's not urgent now doesn't mean that it wouldn't become urgent if it's not completed by the date that's listed as a due date. And then we have a type of workflow sheet for rework, or a way to categorize a workflow sheet as rework. And this is what we use for cases where GCA has made an error that's requiring us to redo something. And because these are our mistakes and we want to correct them quickly, and often once a need for rework is discovered, something would then be overdue because whatever we submitted was not correct. These are our highest priority items. These should be prioritized before new work. And then we have multi-stream request. And these can be any priority level, including rework, but it's a slightly different format because it's for requests that require action from more than one stream. And the priority level will be indicated on the top of the form. And finally, we have checklist, which is a simplified version of the workflow sheet for requests that are related to a checklist form that's used in a stream. Just some important tips whenever you're sending out a workflow sheet. You want to communicate clearly. This should be something that when the person who's receiving it is reading it, that they'll be able to look at it and make sense of it just based on what you have told them to do in the instructions. You want to provide all necessary information for them to be able to work with this, including any attachments. And you need to think about the order in which actions need to be taken. And this is particularly the case when you're routing something multi-stream. You need to think about who needs to act first before the next group can work with it. The goal is that whoever is receiving this will be able to take it and get to work without having to sort of reinvent the research that you already did before you sent the workflow sheet. And so you need to include your explanation that you're writing will need to include an actionable request or be clearly marked as FYI. If you're asking the grant analyst team to research an issue, clearly identify what needs to be researched and why. And as I was just saying, the goal is to pass this along to someone who can act on it without having to repeat your work or research. And some tips as far as the due date that you put on a workflow sheet. If your request requires external communication, for example, reaching out to the sponsor or even reaching out to someone outside of GCA on campus, please kind of allow a little extra time in the due date whenever possible, because we can't control how quickly those external contacts respond to us. And so now getting into the practical side, how to create this form and what it looks like. So you will be doing this from the workflow database. It's an Access database. And you'll want to navigate to the GCA workflow management page within that database. And to create a workflow sheet, you will select the workflow sheet type from the dropdown in the upper right, which will be either single stream, multiple stream, or checklist, and then click Create Workflow Sheet. This will then pull up a screen where you will start at the very top by completing the budget and requester information. This is a case where we've selected current. So this is something that can be completed. In this case, it looks like we're allowing about 2 weeks. The originating stream is the grant analyst. There's a place where if you've chosen rework, you can indicate the stream that has generated the rework. Then you input the budget number. In this case, it's a sub-budget, so you would have both the sub-budget number and the parent budget number. You need to enter it without the dash after the first 2 numbers, though it will automatically correct it if you slip up on that. And then the name is for the name of the person who's submitting the sheet. You would enter today's date, you would enter the due date, and the date to the stream. That is almost always going to be today's date, because I believe that if you put a later date to the stream, that would mean it does not show up in the stream's workload until that point, and it's very rare that you would want to do that. So date to stream, unless you're instructed otherwise, should always be today's date. The next part of the workflow sheet allows you to select which stream the workflow sheet is going to. In this case, we have something that's being sent to invoicing. And so we're noting for them that the budget has a JDE type of mile and JDE status of 0. There's a checkbox here, which we haven't selected, that would allow instruct the team to reset the invoice due date. And you see we have slightly different levels of information for each of the different streams. This is going back to how we did the paper workflow sheets back in the day, where we'd work with each stream to see what kind of information they typically wanted. And so if you're receiving this will give you a quick look in most cases at what kind of request this is going to be. And next up is the heart of the form, the brief overview of the issue that tells you what needs to happen. This is really the most important part of the form. It needs to clearly tell whoever's receiving this what needs to be done and include any actions and details that are needed for the request to be completed. And if you're saying this is urgent, you'll want to indicate why. You'll want to say that, that the sponsor has given a specific deadline, or that, this needs to be set up for, quickly for whatever reason. In this case, it's pretty simple instruction. We're just asking for a revised invoice, and we have said what needs to be done and why, and indicated, unless we have this PO, we won't be paid. With more complex requests, I really recommend using numbered steps or little bullet points. Just makes it a little bit easier for whoever's receiving it to read it and see what needs to happen. See the communication section. In this case, it's something that came in through Grant Tracker, and you would enter the Grant Tracker ID. If it came in via phone or email, you would have the information to the opportunity to click that and fill in some additional information there as well. If you have any attachments to add, which is really more common with things that come in via email than things that come in via Grant Tracker. You could click add attachments, and you might add a copy of the email itself or any accompanying attachments or forms that need to go with that. And just to note that you don't have to select anything in the communication section. In some cases, especially if it's just working from one stream to another, there's no outside request with a Grant Tracker email. It's just something you've discovered while doing your work that needs to be routed to another stream. It's completely fine to not fill in that part. Just make sure you've included clear instructions and added any attachments that are needed. And checklists are very similar to workflow sheets. They're a bit simplified, and the part of it where you're filling in what you need, you want to choose the checklist type. You can enter a brief subject and then fill in what needs to happen. And if you are saving the corresponding documents in the budget folder, you might want to make some notes if there's anything needed to help the person track that down. And then once you've done all the other steps, you're ready to submit the workflow sheet. You'll just go down to the very bottom and click submit. And this will generate a workflow sheet number, which you're probably going to want to note down for tracking purposes. Sorry about this. To head a little bit too quickly there. So when you're logging a workflow sheet, you're going to want to include a note, or at least the GA team usually does this, and we really recommend it, either in the Grant Tracker work notes or in the Grant Tracker note itself, to indicate what action has been requested. You can check with your manager or lead to see if your stream follows this process. You have some codes for priority and whether it's a checklist, whether a reworker is involved. Usually what we will do is we will note the workflow sheet number. It would say something like P3 workflow sheet number 3567 to reporting or something. So you can see what we did with this workflow sheet while you're looking in the Grant Tracker system. So the completed form will be saved and submitted to the stream on the date marked to the stream, which, as I was saying before, is almost always going to be today's date. And if there are multiple streams, it will automatically be routed to the first stream in line. And once the stream has completed their action, they're going to need to indicate both on the form itself and in Grant Tracker what they did, and then complete the form. And if it's multi-stream and you're not the last stream, clicking complete will route it to the next stream in line. The final stream, which would be the only stream in the case of a single stream workflow sheet, needs to make sure that everything is done and to send any communication needed. You'll want to add a message to campus and close the Grant Tracker if the original communication came through Grant Tracker. And you'll want to send out a report, invoice, or any other document that was requested via email or Grant Tracker where applicable. So that's an overview of creating and working with an individual workflow sheet. And if you're on the receiving end of these workflow sheets, you can view workflow sheets that are currently assigned to a stream. And what you see here is a screenshot of everything that was assigned to invoicing when these slides were set up. And looking at this grid, you can see a good bit of information. You can see who created the sheet, the due date. You can see the ones that have been assigned to a stream member already. The ones that are blanks are new ones that probably have not yet been claimed. And one important thing to note about this is you do have the opportunity to sort these fields. You can do it by due date. You can do it by ID number, which is a handy way to sort from oldest to newest. You can sort by assigned to, which is really handy if you've got, you have a group assigned to you and you want to be able to view them all together. So when you've received a workflow sheet and it's been assigned to you, what are you responsible for? Streams sort their workflow sheets according to due dates and priority. And bear in mind that time needs to be allowed for the work to be done. If you have something that's due a week from now, it's still a good idea to look at it before then, just to see if this is something that's going to take more than one day to do. And if you need to allow time to get the work done, if you can't meet a due date, do let the requester know why. You can propose a new due date. We don't always change those. We will sometimes just note that, yes, this will be a little late, but it's good to let the requester know because they may need to reach out to our sponsor or campus contact and let them know about the delay. So when you're ready to complete a workflow sheet, the receiver is responsible, as we were just discussing, for updating grant tracker, if applicable, and you want to make sure to mark that grant tracker is completed so it's not kind of hanging out there after the work has been done. Then on the workflow sheet, you're going to go in and complete the resolution section with what was done by who and when. And that includes entering the completed date and who it was completed by and if the grant tracker was updated. And it's really useful to have even very brief comments here saying what was done, because if we're reviewing this workflow sheet later, we then know what was done and where we might go if we need to look up the communication or get a copy of it. And where does the form go now that it's completed? If you're the final stream on the workflow sheet, when you choose to complete, you will be prompted to save the workflow sheet to the folder. It's going to say, would you like to save the workflow sheet documents to the folder? And we always want that answer to be yes. So you need to choose yes and save it to the appropriate location in the J Drive budget folder. Additionally, all workflow sheets are automatically saved in the analysis tab of the workflow database. If you're there on the home page, if you click analysis, it will take you into a different view where you can search for both current and prior workflow sheets. So now we're going to look through some recently completed workflow sheets. As you're looking at these, think about if you can easily understand what the issue was. Can you tell what actions were taken? How you can see who completed the workflow sheet and when, and just look for any other things that stand out to you. Here we have a current workflow sheet that was routed from within the reporting stream, because we see the originating stream is reporting, and it was sent to changes. And it shows what they were asking for. They were asking for a BSC recon, a indirect cost review for subcontract indirect cost. With a very clear instruction, this is what we're doing. We're doing a final report. We want to make sure that the subcontract indirect costs are good to go. Please do this reconciliation. And this is one where we have nothing in the communication section because it's completely within stream. There wasn't a grant tracker email requesting this. And then we see the resolution that the reconciliation was completed and the JV was sent for review. Next up, we have an example of a rework workflow sheet. One thing you can note here is that the stream that's generated the rework is not always going to be the one who's the stream that's fixing it. In this case, we're saying that the rework was caused by budget setup, but that invoicing is going to be the one to correct it. See that what had happened is there had been an incorrect email that was entered in JDE, and that invoicing is going to update this. And Azalea has very nicely communicated that she has sent the most recent invoice. So that has gone to the sponsor now. But she's asking the invoicing team to update the contact for going forward. Here we see that she has made an attachment. This is probably the backup confirming the correct address for submitting the invoice. And then we see the resolution that JDE has been updated and who has done that and when. Now here we have an example of a multi-stream workflow sheet. See that this started out in cash, and then it comes back to invoicing once that has been done. And we see that there are notes from both streams. The cash, when they unapplied the payment, they made a note of it. And then when it went on to invoicing, they made a note of what happened as well. And here there was a change. They were unable to void the invoice. And so they then sent another workflow sheet to the grant analyst team to reach out to the sponsor. That gives us a very clear record of what was done and why. That's what we like to see. And here we see a checklist, something that came from the grant analyst team. It's asking for an invoice to be sent out using the milestone invoice checklist. The subject line gives a little detail of what's going on. And we have more details in the checklist notes and giving some useful information for this particular award of what needs to be included and not included. And then we also have the completed section with the completed date and who finished this checklist. And it is possible to return a workflow sheet. When you're looking at a workflow sheet and you believe there's more information needed, or if you believe this is something that should not have been routed to your stream, you can send it back to the originator. And when you return a workflow sheet, there's always going to be a return note where you're going to fill in what happened and why. Excuse me. If you click on that returned note, it will pull up a box that shows why the person sent the workflow sheet back to the originator. So this concludes our training on workflow sheets. If you have any questions, please contact your manager or team lead, or you can send an email to gcahelp@uw.edu. Thank you very much.